Hello, welcome back to Subtle. This is Ahmed, and I'm here bringing you another review, a film I'm really excited about, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So when Into the Spider-Verse came out, everyone was raving about it like it was the greatest movie of all time. Now, I liked it, don't get me wrong, I liked it, but I wasn't, as sort of keen as they were. I mean, I thought it was a very good origin story, but it was it followed the typical beats of a superhero origin story, but it was definitely one of the better animated films I've seen, although I'm not too much of an animated movie fan. This one, Across the Spider-Verse, I've got to say, blows the last one out of the water. Now, I said, that it follows a typical origin story beats, but this film takes the concepts that introduced about the multiverse, and dimensional traveling, and it made a really complex story with it. And I really like complex stories. I like Christopher Nolan's Tenet, with the whole time traveling, going back, going forward, and it's something you really can't wrap your head around like immediately. You got to really think about it. I love that stuff. So when this one came around, I was like, wow, I really like this. And I noticed some stuff in this film, and sort of now with the perspective of this film, the last one as well, stuff that I don't think anyone else has noticed, and I'm going to talk about that in another video. But I really like how this movie expanded on the lore of the Spider-Verse and on dimensional traveling, and it proves that before Into the Spider-Verse was made, the creators mapped out the whole trilogy, or whatever, however many movies they're planning. They mapped it out. They knew exactly how the dimensional traveling worked, how the super collider worked, where the story is going to go. And that's something I really appreciate, because it's unlike the Star Wars sequels where, each movie, it was very clear they didn't have a game plan going forward, and like each movie was just making it up as they went along, and it was just like contradicting the previous ones, and it wasn't very good. But this one is really consistent with it, and it really expands on everything. I like how this starts. It starts with showing us the perspective of Gwen, because even though Miles is the main character in these movies, this isn't Miles Morales. This is Spider-Verse. Naturally, we've got to see all these other Spider-Man universes and all these other Spider-Man characters rather than them just coming into this one universe. Now, people do criticize the soundtrack of this movie, saying it's not as good as the last one. Now, okay, granted, like the sort of songs that they get, musicians to do or select for the film, aren't as impactful, but like everyone just brings up "What's Up, Danger," saying, "Oh, there's nothing like that." Fair enough, but like I think the soundtrack overall is a bit more consistent, at least with the original scores. Because like in the last one, I couldn't recall any original scores really, but this one, when the Spot's explaining his origin, for example, the score in that still sticks with me. I was just listening to it the other day. I really liked that score. But yeah, fair enough. There's no, big song like "What's Up, Danger." Now, there's definitely not really a scene like Leap of Faith, really as deep. There is a scene that comes close, for sure. Definitely for sure. And it's sort of quite impactful in the story, but perhaps not emotionally, I think. Now, speaking of the story, there is a very, very criminal ending. Now, I don't say criminal in a bad way. Like, it works. But I mean criminal as in you cannot leave me there. You cannot leave me hanging. I need to know what happens next now. Because I don't want to completely give it away. But like, it's been out for a few days. So like, people will know what I'm talking about if you've seen it. But the cliffhanger, they start building up this massive story. And then it just ends. And okay, so this movie definitely is a part one. Right. I know they retitled Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 and Part 2 into Across the Spider-Verse and Beyond the Spider-Verse. They should have kept it Part 1, Part 2, because this really is half a movie. For example, with Infinity War, originally it was Infinity War Part 1 and Part 2, but then they changed it to Infinity War and Endgame, and that worked because Infinity War and Endgame were two complete movies. They were two separate movies. They had different tones. Across the Spider-Verse is not its own movie. Definitely not. You cannot watch it in isolation. Infinity War has a build-up and it has a conclusion. Across the Spider-Verse has a build-up, no conclusion. The conclusion will come next. It's set up so many things, like 3 different storylines, but none of them get resolved. So I think the titling was a bit misleading in that sense. This is a case of I'd compare it to Dune, which when you went to see it, very clearly said Dune Part 1, and now we're getting Part 2 later this year. That movie ends sort of halfway / a third through the story. However, I don't know how many movies they're planning, but that film definitely is not complete. in this exact same way. Now, the characters in this film, fantastic. In Into the Spider-Verse, we had the group of Spider people, and I'd say Spider-Gwen and Peter B. Parker and Miles, obviously, they were really the characters, and Spider-Man Noir, Peter Walker, Penny Parker, they weren't really characters, they were more just sort of there. But this one, of course, introduces Miguel, introduces Spot, it still has Miles, Gwen, Peter B. Parker, and his parents, of course, and introduces a couple more. The focus is almost entirely on them. There's not really any sort of extra sort of characters. Of course, there's background characters, but there's no one sort of really underdeveloped like I'd say the last one was. And I think the cast, perfect. I don't actually know who plays Spot. I haven't looked it up, but he's so good. He's so good. He manages to go from like a really goofy villain of the week antagonist at the start to a multiversal threat, super sinister at the end. But he has a fantastic range. Same for Oscar Isaac as Spider-Man 2099. Fantastic. He goes from sort of good guy, sympathetic, to scary, antagonizing. They both have fantastic range. And of course, Shamik Moore, Miles, you really hear the emotion in his voice. You hear Haley's performance and Gwen as well. It's just spectacular. I think I really like what they do with the characters as well. They're not just like typical good guys. They're not typical bad guys. There's definitely a spectrum. Even for the villain, Spot. There's a complete spectrum of... First of all, Spot High, he has his own motivation, just like Fisk did in the last one. So you definitely understand all the characters and you can sort of either relate or sympathize with all of them. And there's definitely a moral spectrum because people are at odds. There's no one's wrong. Everyone's right, but it's really confusing to explain, but everyone's right, but they all get what they want. Then no one gets what they want. It doesn't work. There's got to be some compromise somewhere, but it just really... they really blow it out of the park with this film, man. And of course, the animation, like the last one, people loved it. This one, everything is so beautiful. The colors, they do a better job with that in this film. I really like it. Although I will say some of the sort of mechanical choices that I made in the last one are probably a bit better. For example, the frame rates. Okay, no. In the last film, they did this very cool frame rate manipulation where they had Miles be a lower frame rate than Peter. So it was almost like Peter was sort of in his element while Miles was not comfortable in it. But then when he had his leap of faith, then he was in the same frame rate. And that's sort of like subconsciously registers and you notice it upon rewatching. They didn't do as good of a job with the frame rates in this film, I feel. At least, particularly in one scene, where it's really clear that all the Spider-Men have different frame rates, but then there's 4 Spider-Men, and then there's the Spot, so there's 5 characters, and then there's, the universe itself and the buildings and all the rubble, and then that's in its own frame rate, but they're all out of sync, and it just feels very hard to follow the action in that scene. That was just something... It's a little bit frustrating because I don't really want to criticize this film, but that's just something that got in the way of my experience. Now, lastly, I mentioned Tenet earlier. I mentioned it had similarities to Tenet in the stories, but it had another similarity to Tenet, which isn't as good in that when Tenet came out, a lot of people were reporting that some of the dialogue was quite hard to hear. And in this film, for me, at least just more towards the start, I kind of felt the same. Some of the dialogue was a bit hard to hear, and others did report it both in and out of the screen I was watching it in. So I'm not sure whether it was just in that screen or whether it is something universal, but there was quite important dialogue which I missed. So it's something I'd have to go back rewatch or watch with subtitles when it comes out on home release. And I thought not being able to hear some of the dialogue was a bit strange because I was in a big screen with Dolby sound. So I think that's like the best sound you can get. So I was a little confused why I couldn't hear it. But I'll try other formats and perhaps it'll be a bit better. But that was just a little bit frustrating. And I know others felt the same. But everything about the film, the story, the stories, the actors, the characters, the writing, the dialogue, the music, all of that stuff I really either loved or really liked. So I would definitely recommend you see this on the biggest screen with the best sound that you can. And listen, look, if you are a Spider-Man fan, you're going to love this film. If you are a Marvel fan, you're going to love this film. There are so many Easter eggs. I think I missed more than I caught, and I know my stuff. So I'm going to have to go back a few times and rewatch it. So I think it's going to take years for everyone to find all the Easter eggs in the film. And I think it's going to be a quite cool community project where people go frame through frame from the film trying to find out all these Easter eggs. And I think that's definitely going to go on for a long while. Now, if you're a fan of MCU, this is definitely a film to watch. I think since the previous Spider-Verse film, and of course, Venom 2 sort of slightly connecting to the MCU and to No Way Home, I think Marvel has sort of opened up to connecting with Sony a little bit with their films. So I think this film is probably more important than you think, because obviously this is dealing with multiverse traveling, which the MCU sort of is experiencing now with the multiverse saga. So I think, obviously not like storylines, but perhaps elements of what happens with this universe is something that could have some sort of connection within in the multiverse saga, even just like through the visuals of the timeline. I mean, very subtle things like that, nothing major, but it's definitely more important than you think. So I would suggest going and watching it. So again, to conclude, definitely go see Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I couldn't see anyone not liking this film, but of course, obviously some people will. But if you have seen it already, let me know what you thought. If you haven't seen it, but you do go and see it, come back here. Just type in the comments what you think of the film. I do want to have a little discussion with you. I always love hearing what people think about the film, hearing what they think about my thoughts, whether they agree or disagree. I'll always be open to having a discussion with you. So I hope you enjoyed this little review. If you did, please subscribe and come back for more, because I have so many films I'm going to see this month. There's so many films just in this month alone I'm going to go and see, and I'm going to put reviews up for all of them. So please come back. But yeah, thank you for watching so much. Thank you for watching, and take care.